Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description.
Hello everybody. In 2024, we witnessed the end of one of the greatest stories in modern motoring, as Audi finally wound up production of their iconic supercar, the R8. And though rumours are constantly circling that there may indeed be a third generation of R8, as far as Audi are concerned, the official line is that the model is now done. And so, if you've been waiting quietly, thinking of the right moment to pick yourself up an example of the company's one and only supercar, this could be the ideal moment. The problem is, which one to buy? Because if you haven't been paying particularly close attention, it can get a little confusing. So, in today's video, I'm going to tell you about some of the best models in the lineup, which ones to buy, which ones to avoid, and which one maybe could be the car for you. Enjoy. Before we get started today, a quick notice. Though I have tried where I can to make today's video as accurate as possible, the data that I'm using has been collated from various different sources and is using the UK market as its basis. And though the R8 was generally sold in the same configuration worldwide, there may still be some subtle differences depending on where exactly it is that you are. And today's video is not intended to be an in-depth or buyer's guide for any specific car. Instead, it's a general look at the model as a whole. And if you'd like to know more about any of the cars that I've mentioned today, I have driven most of them, and I'll put links to those videos in the description down below. So then, a potted history. The R8's name first made an appearance on the side of a Le Mans car. A very, very successful one. And then later, the car we now know as the R8 first appeared as the Le Mans concept. A few years later, then making production in 2006. The first generation then ceased in 2015, being replaced with this, the second generation, which itself went on until 2024. But no matter which R8 you buy, there are a few things you know you're going to get. First off, an Audi aluminium space frame chassis in the first generation, very, very closely related to that of the Lamborghini Gallardo, and for the second generation, almost identical to that of the Huracan. They also all come with an engine behind, and today are regarded as one of the most affordable and most usable of all supercars. Though I've always had a little bit of issue with that for a couple of reasons. First off, no R8 ever was made with front lift, an essential for urban environments, and all of them have a frankly pathetic boot, just about big enough to take one airline carry-on, and then in coupe guise with a little shelf behind you, but no more. I would consider just about every Ferrari or McLaren equivalent to actually be a more usable proposition than an R8. But of course, this is a supercar, and so for many people, those concerns are simply inconsequential. How then are you to decide which model to buy? Well, let's start at the very beginning, because when it landed, the R8 came in just one guise, with a V8 in the back, a then new engine, which Audi dubbed their high rev concept. It had first been seen in the B7 generation RS4, and in the R8 had a dry sump. It also had a redline of over 8,000 RPM and power output of some 420 horses. The car was never quite as light as people would expect, the early coupe being 1,620 kilos, meaning today it gives you more sports car performance, but for my money it is still a supercar through and through, if for no other reason than the proportions of it give it an utterly beguiling stance that mean when you see it going past, you're never ever to mistake it for just a TT with bells on, no matter how many people might claim otherwise. Having now lived for the last week with both one of those, the very first of the R8s, and one of these, the last, the GT rear-wheel drive, I can tell you, though this is certainly the diva, the old star, she's still got it, because wherever I take that car, it attracts many positive looks, comments, and more than a few smiles. Of perhaps greatest importance for many people is the fact that the first generation of R8 was available with a manual gearbox. More than that, a beautiful gated item that not everybody loves, but does have that old school supercar flair, and is a very visual and prominent reminder of the Lamborghini DNA flowing through the car. But if for whatever reason you didn't want that, your alternative was the Audi R-Tronic system, effectively their version of the Lamborghini e-gear setup, a single clutch automated manual that is, to be honest, nowhere near as bad as many people make out, but also, for my money, is just not anywhere near as exciting as the manual. And with lots of early cars being available in manual guise, that to me is always the gearbox that I would want.
From 2009, Audi began to expand the R8 lineup. First, the car was gifted the option of a mildly detuned version of the 5.2-litre naturally aspirated V10 as seen in the second generation Lamborghini Gallardo. In 2010, that car was then made available in Spyder guise. And finally, in 2011, they rolled out the drop-top variant to the V8 as well. Alongside of this, Audi also released the R8's first and arguably best special editions, the R8 GT Coupe of 2010, followed by the GT Spyder in 2011.
And this was built using much the same recipe as Lamborghini's Gallardo Superleggera, so the car went on a strict diet, losing some 100 kilos. In fact, it is so extreme that the Spyder variant of the R8 GT, as owned by my good buddy Ant from JayEmm and Friends and Sports and Touring, is lighter than the coupe version of the regular V10. It also made a bit more power, the same as the regular Gallardo, 560 horses, though unfortunately it was offered only with the R-tronic gearbox. And that, I think, even today puts a great many people off what is otherwise an absolutely sensational car. It has a very different character to the regular R8, being much firmer, more tied down and more track orientated. The whole thing just feels a lot more aggressive, but it is honestly a sensational car and represents extraordinarily good value for money. Compared even with the Gallardo and certainly the Ferrari 430 Scuderia, this is a car that could go toe-to-toe with either of them and costs £100,000 less than the prancing horse. For the 2012 model year, the car was then facelifted, receiving a few external and internal updates, though by and large the platform remained fundamentally the same. Both engines remained available, but the big news was the introduction of a new gearbox. Replacing the old R-tronic was Audi's S-tronic gearbox, their 7-speed dual clutch. And as soon as that was made available, sales of the manual plummeted, as did sales of the V8. To find any V8 after the V10 was launched is relatively difficult. To find a manual V8, near impossible. In fact, sales of the manual V10 were also extremely low. And if you wanted the more powerful Plus variant introduced with the facelift, they're very rare indeed. And if I were to pick a connoisseur's R8, that might be it. For here in the UK, they made very, very, very low double digits of the R8 V10 Plus with a manual. And given the market today, they may now command a bit more money. But if you want yourself an old school enjoyable supercar that's still usable every day and you're not fussed about a manual, well, a facelift R8 with the S-tronic box, it's a good thing to buy. The model then went on until 2015, but before production ended, we did get one last special variant, the LMX. Now this took a very different approach to the GT, where that was all focused on weight saving and increased performance. The LMX instead was more about luxury. It did give you a little bit more performance through a slight remap of the engine to 570 horsepower, but otherwise mechanically the car wasn't that different. What you did get instead was plenty of luxury trim, including some nice stitching throughout, even in the boot, and Audi's laser lights, which was a big deal at the time, as well as a bespoke blue paint. Production of the first generation then came to a close in 2015, being replaced almost immediately by the second gen car, which is actually a very different affair. First off, visually it takes a different approach. Now, many more angles as opposed to curves. And although initially I much preferred the looks of the later car, today, actually, I think it's the first gen R8 that has aged far better. However, you cannot argue the fact that under the skin, Audi really moved the game on. Unlike the first car, this one was developed in tandem with Lamborghini, who then got the Huracan out of it, and Audi the R8. And where for the first generation there are some differences in terms of key specification, with the R8 having a longer wheelbase than the Gallardo, for the second gen they are almost identical. But that's not always a bad thing, and here that means that the aluminium chassis is now joined by several fairly prominent sections of carbon fibre. So for the convertible car, it is an even better drive than ever before. Albeit, this is particularly key for the second generation car. If you do want a Spyder, make sure that you fit. No R8 is particularly generous inside, the second generation weirdly feeling much tighter than the first, but the Spyder is really quite extreme, and there are a few people that I know who just can't fit in one that can fit in a great deal of other things you wouldn't expect to be that way around. Other big changes made for the second generation car include the end of the V8 engine, perhaps inevitable, because by the end of production of the first, not many people were buying it. And more tragically, yet I think equally as predictable, the loss of the manual gearbox, with this car only ever getting the 7-speed S-Tronic, which as a daily thing is very nice, but just never had the excitement or the interactivity of the manual, or that old school mechanical feeling of the R-Tronic box. The engine also gained a few upgrades, where previously it was direct injection only, now it had port injection too, meaning it was not just more powerful, but also, in theory, a little bit longer lived, no longer needing the periodic carbon cleanouts of the earlier lump. The all-wheel drive system was also changed. Previously it was a Torsen one, albeit with a very heavy rear-wheel drive bias, and in here a Haldex one, meaning that theoretically this car can now deliver 100% of its torque to the rear wheels, albeit most of the time it didn't, instead apportioning it as required. The early second generation R8 also received quite a bit of flack for its steering. You see, they ditched the old and much loved hydraulic system of the previous car and instead installed a new electric one, and to complicate things, some of the models got variable ratio too. The net result being that most journalists absolutely hated the way the new R8 steered. They didn't mind the way that it went down a road because it was still fairly quick, but it just lacked that interactivity and that excitement of the early car. And this may be part of the reason why, soon on, they built a rear-wheel drive variant, the first time the factory had done so for any R8 model. Initially, it was the limited edition rear-wheel series, the RWS, but later they made a production version called the RWD. Also, making up for the loss of the old V8 engine, you now had the V10 in different flavours. So generally speaking, there was an entry-level model, typically making 540 to 570 horsepower, and then you'd have the top of the line, typically called A+. That was 620. The cars were available with a number of different options, though sadly here in the UK we were denied a great many of them, instead being limited typically to different interior trims and a few exterior colours, with very, very occasional buyers persuading their dealer to let them go through the Audi individual programme. And when those cars come up, I have to say, they look utterly stunning. As a little bit of compensation, what we did get was 5 examples only of something called the Performance Parts Edition. That was the run-out for the first version of the second generation car in 2018. And that featured, as you might guess, all of the performance parts that Audi would happily sell to anybody else buying one of these, but for some reason not us. Today, they can command fairly strong money, something like £140,000. With them being extremely rare, I've never even seen one, and certainly haven't driven one, so couldn't tell you whether it's worth it or not. In 2018, the car was then facelifted, and the easy way to tell the new one, apart from the old one, is the addition of some little frippery on the front. 3 little apparent cutouts underneath the bonnet, which are in fact nothing of the sort. In fact, many people didn't even like the fact that for this generation they ditched the look of the old side blades, but the truth is that, yeah, the top of these don't do anything, nor did they in the old car. They're just decorative. However, when 2018 came along, a few things changed. The car gained an OPF, and as legislation in Europe dictated, it got quieter. So if you want the loudest and most raucous of the R8s, if you can't get a Performance Parts Edition, then you get yourself one of the 2015 to 2018 pre-facelift models of the second generation. The final iteration of the car then went through a few different changes. As already mentioned, the rear-wheel drive became a series production model, not to be confused with the rear-wheel series, which was a limited production model. And then, towards the end of production, they introduced what they called the performance line, which meant that both the base model and the top-end one got a little bit more go, the specification changed, and the price went up by quite a bit too. I suspect at this point they weren't really selling all that many cars. And then, to end, they gave us this. the R8 GT rear-wheel drive performance, which is in theory the most extreme and hardcore R8 ever made, but in truth is nothing of the sort. To drive, this feels just like most other second-generation R8s, only with slightly stiffer suspension. These did come with optional coilovers that apparently do really make it quite special, but to this the press car, for a reason I cannot fathom, doesn't have them. And in terms of bespoke parts, all you actually get with this is a new torque-biased rear differential thing that is frankly terrifying on the road, a different final drive, and a remap for the 7-speed gearbox, which does make it a little bit more aggressive, does make it somewhat entertaining, but in all honesty, just not worth it. Apparently, Audi did have plans internally to build something a little bit like the first GT, with some real proper mechanical changes, but the powers that be decided nobody would buy the car because it would have been too expensive. Personally, I think they're killjoys and they should have given it a go. The R8 has done so much for the company that I think it deserved a proper send-off, and this to me is not it. Looks very lovely with all its race-derived frippery, but honestly, for me, the R8 to have is a first gen without any silly stuff bolted to it, or if you must have the ultimate driving machine, an R8 GT. However, the second generation is not a lost cause. You have much more up-to-date infotainment, you have Android Auto, Apple CarPlay for most of the later ones, and there is a lot that you can do with them. More or less all of them can make the same power as the top-end models, so if you get one with 540 horsepower, it can easily make 620 should you want it to. Though I would issue a small word of caution. These cars to me never really felt like they wanted to be rear-wheel drive. With Quattro, they're much more dependable and much more trustworthy. In two-wheel drive, guys, they can be a little bitey, a little snappy, and not in a fun, pleasant, let's have a bit of a laugh at a roundabout kind of way. Not that I do that sort of stuff anyway. However, I have now done an awful lot of miles in R8s of all generations and can say that while they're not quite as good at crossing continents as you might think with them being an Audi, you can still daily drive them. You have to watch out about aggressive ramps in car parks, but beyond that, they're fairly usable. If the storage space isn't a problem, they're nice, comfortable, usually, easy to drive, and they shouldn't really be any more demanding than an RS4. They are also, I think, in most cases, exceptional value for money. And so, if you are thinking of picking yourself up a supercar that shouldn't break the bank, an R8 is a very good choice. Best of all, here in the UK at least, you can get a warranty from Audi on just about all of them. Provided the car has less than 100,000 miles on the clock, it might be possible. And that's not something you can say for the Lamborghini equivalent. And having driven both Gallardo and Huracan, I can say quite comfortably, I would definitely have one of these over a Huracan. And I would probably have an early one over a Gallardo as well. Though, if you'd like to know the truth about the differences between those two cars, check out Ant's video on the R8 GT compared with his Gallardo Superleggera. They are much more different than you might first think. So, there we go. That hopefully is a helpful primer on some of the R8 models that are available for you to buy. Are there any that I've missed? Have you bought one? What's your experience of it been like? Did it meet expectations or did it disappoint? Did you flog it and replace it with a TTRS and enjoy that a lot more? Please hop into the comment section below and tell me. And if you haven't already, hit the like button and subscribe as well, because it costs you nothing but does make a big difference to me. And so, with that, I wish to say simply a big thank you to Audi for lending me this pair of magnificent motor cars and allowing me to enjoy just about every part of the R8 story. It's been a blast. Goodbye.